Hi everyone, I'm Josh Rushing and you're in the stream. Today we're talking about how new abortion bans in the United States are affecting women. What's your take? Share your thoughts and experiences in our live YouTube chat. It's been more than 100 days since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and ended the constitutional right to abortion. The procedure is now banned or severely restricted in more than a dozen states. That means that 1 in 3 women now live in a state with no abortion access, putting them at risk for worse health outcomes. The bans are also having some unintended consequences. Some states are restricting medicine used to treat illnesses like cancer and lupus because they can also be used to end a pregnancy. Physicians are hesitant to treat those with high-risk pregnancies. Listen to this doctor's take.
We take this oath to do no harm, and I feel like the law is forcing me to not practice that oath. We had a patient recently whose fetus had a diagnosis of anencephaly, meaning that sort of the top part of the fetus's skull had not formed. This is a lethal diagnosis. This is not something where that baby can survive outside of the womb. Before the Dobbs ruling, we would have been able to care for her at the same hospital where she delivered her last 2 children. Now, because that fetus still had cardiac activity, we had to refer her out of state.
And joining us to talk about the healthcare landscape and how the healthcare landscape has changed since Roe was overturned is Elizabeth Nash in Washington, D.C. She's the Principal Policy Associate at the Guttmacher Institute, an NGO that focuses on reproductive rights. We're also joined by Dr. Jessica Rubino, a family medicine physician from Austin, Texas, and Michelle Goodwin, professor of law at the University of California and author of Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood. All right, guys, thank you so much for being with us. Michelle, I'd like to begin with you because I think this is kind of confusing, particularly for our international audience, that there's this kind of patchwork of laws where it's different all across the U.S. I'm going to bring up a map on my laptop while you talk about it. And can you kind of explain to someone who maybe isn't familiar with the U.S. legal system why this is so different and what's happening across the U.S.?
They would be right to be confused of those who are abroad and also in the United States. So after the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, leaving states to do whatever they want with regard to abortion. So that meant that the state of Mississippi could say no abortions in our state with no exceptions for rape or incest. It meant that other states could say that we have a ban on abortion after 8 weeks of pregnancy or 12 weeks of pregnancy. It meant that the Texas law, SB 8, which bans abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy with no exceptions for rape or incest, and that also has a bounty hunter provision, was lawful. The Supreme Court had already ruled that that law could go into effect essentially by failing to intervene. So across the country, we have states doing different things. But I will say this, in states like New York, Illinois, California, Colorado, there are folks in Kansas fighting back, saying that there is a constitutional right in their states to be able to terminate a pregnancy, or at least if it's not written into their constitutions, it's something that their legislatures have made clear that folks in those states are safe to have abortions.
Well, Jessica, what does it mean? You're in Texas, and I'm still looking at this map on my laptop, and Texas is listed as one of the most restrictive states in the union. What does that mean for you as a doctor, and what does that mean for some of your patients?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I am a family medicine physician, and I specialize in abortion care. And the reality is actually, as a Texas provider, I have always, over the last 4 to 5 years, I've always worked under restrictions in Texas. So we always had rules about who could do the ultrasound. We had rules about who, like the information I had to give my patients and what I was allowed to say. So I always had that. Then about a year ago, SB 8 started. That was the 6-week ban. That was almost a complete shutdown of things. And then now, of course, since Roe, it's been several months. And basically, it's a day-to-day struggle. Every patient visit is much more difficult than it was because obviously I'm not doing abortions. I'm not able to do any. And that's regardless of the health of the person in front of me, why they need that abortion. I mean, there's just no exception. So it's just a flat ban at this point.
Wow.
And we might also add to that point that in Texas, as you were just mentioning, that these restrictions have been going on for some time, then that has also led in some ways to Texas being one of the most dangerous places to be pregnant, even before Dobbs, with very high rates of maternal mortality, which some attribute to the fact that clinics had to close just in the wake of all of that anti-abortion legislating that was taking place in Texas over the years.
And Michelle, you mentioned Dobbs. Dobbs is the case, the Supreme Court case that overturned Roe v. Wade. Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I had a patient who was severely ill. And so regardless of what we think, there might be an exception for something like that. So it's very dangerous in Texas to be pregnant. She was someone who was in kidney failure. I mean, a pregnancy for her that's a death sentence for her. And so we had to tell someone who was pregnant and in kidney failure that they needed to leave the state to get an abortion. But even just telling someone, even just not doing their abortion in that moment, and instead sending someone who's very sick, also who's pregnant, across state lines, all that traveling, I mean, on the way there, she could have died of a blood clot. It's not a safe situation.
It's shocking. Well, hold on. I want to bring in someone from our community. This is Amanda Matos. She's the Senior Director of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And then we're going to come to you, Elizabeth, next. So stand by just a second.
3 months since the fall of Roe, the nation is in a public health crisis. Nearly 1/3 of U.S. states have abortion bans in effect. 1/3 American women have lost the right to control their bodies. And in states where abortion is still protected, Planned Parenthood health centers are seeing a huge increase in patients. There's a health center on the border of Illinois and Missouri that has already seen a 30% increase. Wait times have gone from 4 days to 2.5 weeks. Banning abortion does not stop people from needing abortion. It puts people's lives at danger.
And Elizabeth, I know you keep a close eye on this across the country. What is happening with clinics as we speak?
So, what we've seen in the states that have banned abortion, where there were 66 clinics total, that almost 1/3 of them have had to entirely close. And then the remaining 2/3 have been able to stay open, but providing other reproductive health care. And I think this is actually a critical point, what Jessica was talking about, the conversations you're having with patients. In many states, a pregnant person who is having a severe physical health condition, or there's a condition with the pregnancy, sometimes the providers, particularly like the fetal medicine providers, are having trouble even having these conversations because the providers are scared that they will be violating the abortion ban by simply providing information. So patients are very confused when they're having these coded conversations with healthcare providers who are actually trying to transmit information in a way that doesn't put them in risk of legal jeopardy. There's that. And then when we think about all of these states with abortion bans, you're thinking about 19.2 million women of reproductive age living in these states. And these states are right. It's primarily the South, like we saw on the map, right? The South and the Midwest. So it's not simply the issue of crossing one state border. It's crossing multiple state borders, right?
Was that Michelle?
Right, Michelle?
Did you want to jump in?
Well, yes. I mean, part of the problem is that it's not just women and adults with the capacity for pregnancy, but we're also talking about children, right? We're talking about a girl 10 years old who was raped when she was 9, having to flee the state of Ohio to get to Indiana in order to be able to terminate that pregnancy. And then the attorney general in that state, and it's a political office, where he then goes on national news saying that he wanted to investigate the doctor that performed that abortion. Or we're talking about a woman in Louisiana who was diagnosed with having a fetus with no skull development, but in that state being denied an abortion, even though that is a fatal condition for the fetus. Or we're talking about Florida, where a 16-year-old girl who is without parents, has no parents, and sought to have an abortion in a judicial bypass, where a judge ruled that she's too immature to have an abortion, but seemingly mature enough to become a parent at the age of 16. And this is not episodic. I mean, we're talking about systemic failures across the country. And if we just look at Mississippi, the state that brought the challenge to the Supreme Court, that's a state where if you are a Black woman, you are 118 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion. We haven't even touched on maternal mortality and the backdrop of the US.
Yeah, I'm going to actually show the audience something on my laptop right now with maternal mortality in the US, where it shows it just far outstrips that of other industrialized nations. It's 23.8, and that's within like 100,000 live births. Whereas with France, it's like a third of that, the next one. Jessica, as a doctor, like, what's going on there? Why?
Well, this really points out something that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think this all caused. It just doesn't affect just people who say, I want an abortion. It affects all the healthcare surrounding that, because having an abortion, reproductive health care is part of our whole person. So I have people now, I had someone just in the other day who was going through a normal process of a miscarriage, but a desired pregnancy. It was a very traumatic process for her because she wanted that pregnancy. She had so much blood loss during it that she lost consciousness 2 times and still didn't go to the hospital because she was afraid that she was like, I don't know, will they put me in jail? Will they think I tried to do the abortion on my own? She was like, I swear to you, I didn't. So it's even visits I have now, every single visit in my office, even for IUDs. The question always comes back to, yeah, but what am I going to do? What happens if this doesn't work? Because most forms of birth control, in fact, all that I can think of, have some failure rate. So this inevitably spans out and affects all of the healthcare force. It puts all of us at more danger.
Does it make you feel criminalized as a doctor? Did you ever imagine feeling this way when you went through med school and thought what you were going to be doing with a career?
No, but once I got here to Texas and started doing abortions, I realized that was the landscape here and it was only going to get worse. So then I kind of expected it. But I mean, I didn't know it would be to the point where I worry about what I put in a patient chart. Our patient charts were supposed to be able to write the most detailed, accurate information so the next clinician can look at that patient, pick up the care, know what's going on. That's part of good medical care. And in the meantime, I'm worried, is someone going to subpoena someone else for these records and pull these records? And is the patient going to get in trouble? It's affected everything about what we do.
I want to bring in some comments from our YouTube audience. This is from someone named Vishal, says health and well-being should be the first priority. And this is from D. Boudreau, who says, I'm an American. I think this is terrible. Forcing women to give birth. This is misogynist and pro-poverty. Does anyone want to kind of riff on pro-poverty angle on this? Michelle?
Well, I would say, it is pro-poverty, but I would also say that it's involuntary reproductive servitude. It is forcing girls, women, people with the capacity for pregnancy to endure pregnancies, which were already highly risky in the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2016 reported that, and this was based on other empirical studies, that a woman is 14 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion in the United States. So even with that information that the Supreme Court had, you put that in the backdrop of what we're talking about today, and it is a deadly proposition. But the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude, and this is another form of it, and we need to recognize it as such.
And Elizabeth, does this reflect the majority of Americans' opinion on this?
Well, no. That's part of the issue, is that the vast majority of the American public supports abortion rights. It's just that the politicians don't have the same values. And there's a long history of how the elections have changed and, where states have Republican control and what that means. And frankly, what that means is a lot of what Michelle and Jessica are talking about around limited access to pregnancy care. They aren't putting in place the programs and the policies they need to protect maternal health. And so then you add an abortion ban on top of it, and you really see the harm that is being done. And there are vast inequities by race, and that's by design. And so we're really seeing the impact of these conservative legislatures in a way that doesn't reflect their constituencies. For example, in Indiana, there was a special session on abortion. Now, an abortion ban was passed, but frankly, there was a line 10 hours long of people coming out to say that they support abortion rights, and the legislature pretty much ignored them. So there's a long way to go to have the publics be represented by their legislatures.
And we have to remember, too, that because of our systemic racism, because of the way our society is built, that a pregnancy, even a otherwise healthy pregnancy, does not affect everyone the same way. For some people, it means it's a happy experience, it's a supported experience in a supported community. For some people, it's a stressful experience that they do not have the money for. And then, so for some people needing to get an abortion, like even now, needing to get an abortion, if you're a privileged person in Texas, you could take a vacation to Colorado for the weekend. But for someone else, that 100% means they cannot get out of the state, and they will have to carry that pregnancy to term. It's not even equal consequences for everyone in this country.
Speaking of consequences,
it's really
are there not?
New Jane Crow.
Oh,
No, I was going to say that it's the new Jane Crow, right? I mean, it is just like the systems of Jim Crow that we experience, which people understand because they saw the videos, they saw the photo images. We know how cruel Jim Crow was, racialized political oppression in the United States. And now we have a version of that is a political oppression of women, girls, and people with the capacities for pregnancy. And there is a racial overlay to this as well, because it means that those that are at the intersections of being poor and being a person of color feel the heavy weight of the political restrictions against abortion. For those women, it is very difficult to be able to take time off for work. It is very difficult to be able to afford the childcare. It is very difficult to afford the gas, the train fare, the airfare to be able to get out of state. These are the problems of these times.
Yeah. And so when we're thinking about those costs, just to flag for everyone, a typical abortion on average across the country, so maybe not in your state, costs about $550. And then when you start to add in 3 or 4 days travel, you can imagine the hundreds of additional dollars that that's going to entail for gas, for hotel, for food, for other incidentals. And so imagine trying to pull all like $1,000 together very quickly. And because 75% of abortion patients are low income, when they're leaving work, they probably are not getting paid time off. So that's also money out of the pockets of those people trying to make this journey, leaving their safety, their social networks in their home. It's really an insurmountable burden to really ask of people.
And Elizabeth, we talk about traveling to other states. What's happening to the clinics that are still open on the borders of states where it's been restricted?
So, what we see not just on the borders of these states where abortion is available, but also, further afield into states like Washington State or Maryland, what you're seeing are delays in accessing care. And it's not unusual for these delays to be 4 weeks. And those weeks are critical when you're thinking about getting care, right? Sure, many people do recognize a pregnancy around 6 or 7 weeks, but not everyone. And so if you're adding in 4 weeks additional delay, you're making this journey very, very hard, and in fact putting that insurmountable burden straight in the front of the face of these patients.
And notably, most of those individuals who will be seeking to terminate their pregnancies are already parents, are already mothers, right? And so when we think about what is already a national crisis, even outside of the context of abortion, the fact that we have not invested in the infrastructure of childcare, now adding this layer on is just a burden that is seemingly too much to bear for so many.
And Elizabeth, much of this is at stake as we're looking at midterm elections in the U.S. as to what could happen here, because there are 2 competing laws in Congress right now. One that would enshrine abortion rights and one that would permanently take them away. And I think it's interesting that Congress is now considering this. They had 50 years to consider it while Roe was in place, and they didn't take it up. But it seems like maybe there's more of an appetite to take it up now. Elizabeth, can you kind of walk us through what these midterm elections mean for this issue?
Sure. So I think, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One piece, yes, is Congress and the Senate, what is happening there. And clearly, there's no trend that the Democrats are going to retain both the House and the Senate, or that the Republicans are going to take over the Senate or even the House. So everything is very unclear. So we don't know exactly what will happen. At the state level, we also have hundreds and thousands of elections happening in state houses across the country and statewide offices. And of course, this is where the battle has been for so long, is in these state houses. And given that districts are so gerrymandered, it may be very difficult to see more than a small change in these state legislatures. And the hope is that some of these statewide offices, like for governor and attorney general, can stay in the hands or flip to be in the hands of those who support abortion rights, because we need to have those bulwarks in place to start rebuilding, because we have to push back against these abortion bans so that we can recover from where we are now.
Michelle, another consequence of the Dobbs decision is Justice Thomas's opinion might open up taking away a handful of other rights. I want to show my audience now, it could question Griswold, which said that married couples have the right to use contraceptions. It could question Lawrence, which struck down laws that criminalize gay sex. And it could strike down Obergefell, which legalized same-sex marriage. And I might even throw in Loving, which legalized interracial marriage. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So in Justice Thomas's concurring opinion, he suggested that every area of privacy that the Supreme Court has visited upon and has led to rights for vulnerable groups should be called into question and should also be overturned. Notably, he made an exception with regard to Loving, which was the 1967 case that struck down anti-miscegenation laws that barred Black people and white people from marriage. Now, that is the one area where he said there was an exception. Notably, Justice Thomas would be affected by that personally himself. But he did open the door for challenges with regard to same-sex marriage, contraception, and more. So people should be worried. And even though Justice Alito and Justice Kavanaugh said that there are guardrails protecting those privacy rights, you shouldn't trust that with this court at all. It would be wrong to give too much deference to this court to protect those rights as well.
It needs to be Congress's job to represent the people here, right? And to say what rights they have or not.
Well, we wish that Congress would have addressed this long before, but I think that the reason why they had not is that it is highly unusual that the Supreme Court strips away a right. I think that there was the understanding when Roe v. Wade is a 7-2 opinion and 5 of those justices were Republican appointed. I think there was no sense that there needed to be a worry about Roe v. Wade. And clearly, legislators over time were wrong, that there were those waiting in the bush and ready to pounce.
I got about a minute left here, and I just want to know, how are you going to continue being a doctor there in Texas?
Well, frankly, I'm not. I don't have much longer before I'm going to be leaving the clinic I've been in, because it's untenable. I mean, I have to look at every patient in the face and decide between bad medical care and legal medical care versus good medical care. And that is not a position. I mean, if Texas wanted to have worse health outcomes than they already do, if they wanted all good doctors to leave from the state, then I think that's exactly what they're going to get.
Wow. That's it for our show today. Listen, if you want to learn more about this, if you want to see Elizabeth more and Jessica more, you can check out Fault Lines, where we have them both in that program. It's called The End of Roe. We're going to post a YouTube link right now in the YouTube chat for this episode. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Elizabeth, Jessica, Michelle, and, of course, you watching live.